My name is Diane. I was 38 years old when my husband of 11 years sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where I used to crush his anti-nausea pills into applesauce, and asked me for a divorce. It was the same day his oncologist told us the cancer was gone. He looked relieved. Not about the remission, about the conversation. He said I'd become his caregiver, not his wife. He said it like he'd rehearsed it, like I was a problem he'd finally found the courage to solve. What he didn't know was that I'd already found the emails, 14 months of them, written while I was driving him to chemotherapy twice a week. He thought he was leaving a woman who'd forgotten who she was. He had no idea what I'd already started building. Let me tell you how I got here. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. I made the smoothie the way I always made it. 4 ounces of almond milk first, then the kale, 2 packed handfuls, then half an inch of fresh ginger I'd already peeled and sliced the night before, 1 banana, frozen, a scoop of the vanilla protein powder his nutritionist had recommended 8 months in, when he dropped 19 pounds and Dr. Nkechi Odom, the oncologist managing his care, started watching his muscle mass as closely as his white count. I didn't think about the steps anymore. My hands just did it. 22 months of mornings will do that to you. 22 months of adjusting the ratio. A little less ginger when his stomach was bad, a little more banana when he needed the calories, until I knew that blender the way I knew his medication schedule, which is to say, perfectly and without being asked. The afternoon meds were already sorted. 2 of the anti-nausea tablets, though we were likely past needing those. The vitamin D, the prescription potassium. I kept them in a weekly organizer I restocked every Sunday, same as I'd done since month 2, when I realized Raymond would forget if I didn't build the system myself. I built a lot of systems. That was the year I should have finished my BSN. I'd been 3 months from completing it. 3 months when the diagnosis came back. Stage 3 lymphoma, the kind of words that rearrange every plan you've ever made. I withdrew from my courses the same week we met with the oncology team for the first time. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things that year. I dropped from full-time nursing to 2 shifts a week. 2, enough to keep my license current, not enough to build anything. The income cut was brutal, and we both knew it, and neither of us talked about it much, because there wasn't anything useful to say. I became his scheduler, his driver, his medication manager, his 2 in the morning, somebody hold me. I learned his insurance portal better than our account rep did. I filed appeals on 3 denied claims and won 2 of them. And when his hair started coming out in the shower, when he stood in the bathroom doorway with wet eyes and didn't say a word, I got the scissors myself. I still remember the weight of my locks hitting the floor, the sound they made. Raymond watching me in the mirror with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Something cracked open and unguarded, and I thought, this is love. I thought it was the truest thing I'd ever done. I still don't know what to do with that memory. The appointment was at 9 in the morning. Dr. Odom, precise, warm, the kind of physician who learns the caregiver's name and uses it, reviewed the final scan results with a calm that somehow made the news hit harder than any amount of drama could have. The cancer was gone. Full remission. Everything the last 2 scans had suggested was now confirmed. She shook both our hands. She said Raymond's consistency with his treatment protocol had been remarkable. She looked at me when she said it. I held it together until we got to the car. Then I sat in the passenger seat and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in almost 2 years. Not grief. Relief. The bone-deep, 22-month late release of it. My whole body shook with how much I'd been holding. Raymond patted my hand twice. He was quiet the whole drive home. I noticed. I filed it under processing. He'd just been told he was going to live. People responded to that in all kinds of ways. I knew that better than most. I gave him the silence, and I watched the road, and I thought about whether I could re-enroll in my BSN program for the spring semester. I was already planning forward. That's what I did. That's all I knew how to do. That evening, I was washing the blender when he came into the kitchen and sat down at the table. The same table where I'd crushed his anti-nausea pills into applesauce on the bad weeks, where I'd spread his insurance paperwork across every inch of surface and worked through it with a highlighter and a legal pad like it was my second job, which it was. He placed his hands flat on the table, palms down. I noticed that detail, the deliberateness of it, the way I noticed everything. Old nursing habit. You read a room before you enter it. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. He said he felt like a different person now. He said he needed to find out who he was without the illness defining him. You know what the worst part was? He looked relieved. Like he'd been holding his breath for months, waiting for this moment. Not the remission, this conversation. My hands went still around the blender jar. He said he loved me. He said he wasn't in love with me. He said I had become his caregiver, not his wife, and he didn't want me spending my life taking care of a sick man. He wasn't sick anymore. I pointed that out. He didn't answer. He'd practiced it. That was the first thing I knew for certain. Not suspected, knew. I'd spent 11 years listening to Raymond talk, and I understood the difference between the man thinking out loud and the man delivering a prepared position. This was the second one. The cadence was too even. The phrases were too clean. I love you, but I'm not in love with you doesn't come out that smooth unless you've said it to yourself in a mirror at least a dozen times. I stood at the sink and I listened to the whole thing. He said our marriage had shifted into something it was never supposed to be. He said the illness had changed the dynamic in ways neither of us chose, but both of us felt. He said he needed space to rediscover himself now that he was well, that he'd spent 2 years in survival mode, and he deserved the chance to figure out who he was on the other side of it. He actually used the word deserved. I set the blender jar down on the counter, carefully. Didn't say a word. He kept going. He said he hoped we could handle this with maturity. He said he didn't want things to get ugly. He said he'd always care about me, that nothing could change what we'd been through together, but that sometimes love transformed into something that looked different from the outside than it felt on the inside. I didn't know what that last part meant. I don't think he did either. But it sounded like something. When he finally stopped talking, I turned around and looked at him. I asked him one question. I said, "If you were still sick, would you be having this conversation?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the table. That was my answer. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I did something that seemed to unsettle him more than either of those things would have. I went completely quiet. Not the quiet of someone processing shock, but the quiet of someone switching registers entirely. He kept glancing up at me, waiting for something, tears maybe, or an argument, something he'd rehearsed a response to. I didn't give him anything to respond to. After a few minutes of that silence stretching between us like a held breath, he pushed back from the table. He said we'd talk more tomorrow. He said he knew this was a lot to take in. I said, "Okay." Just that. One word. He went to the bedroom. I sat at that table for a long time after he left. The kitchen was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of traffic outside. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was running a leaf blower at 8:30 at night, which felt appropriately absurd. Here's the thing about being a nurse for 15 years. You learn early that panic is a luxury you can't always afford, and that the most useful thing a body can do in a crisis is observe. Slow down. Catalog. What are the symptoms? When did they start? What's the pattern? My mind did that automatically. I didn't choose it. Was I hurt? Yes. But the hurt was sitting underneath something else, something cooler, something that was already asking when instead of why, because the why didn't matter yet. The when did. I started thinking backward. His phone. It had been face down on every surface for how long? I tried to pinpoint it and couldn't, because it had happened gradually, the way most things do. One day it was just always screen side down, On the nightstand, on the kitchen counter, on the coffee table. He'd frame his hand over it when a notification came in, a reflex so practiced I'd stopped registering it. When had his texts back to me started arriving in 30-minute gaps? He used to reply within minutes. We used to send each other stupid things, articles, jokes, pictures of dogs we saw on the street. I couldn't remember the last time he'd sent me something like that. I'd stopped noticing when it stopped because I was busy. I was always busy. I was busy keeping him alive. The gym. He'd started going in January, which I'd been glad about. Physical activity after treatment was good for recovery. Dr. Odom had actually encouraged it. But he went at 7 in the morning, before I was usually up. He never asked if I wanted to come. Not once. Raymond, who used to drag me to every new thing he discovered, who had once spent 40 minutes convincing me to try a Korean spa on a Tuesday. He stopped inviting me into things. And I hadn't noticed because I was deep inside the logic of caregiving, where his needs were the weather, and I was just living in it. I got up. I rinsed my coffee cup. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked down the hallway to the bedroom and cracked the door open just enough to see that Raymond was already turned away, already still. His phone was on the nightstand, face down the way it always was now. And standing there in the dark of that doorway, I understood something I'd been refusing to understand for longer than I wanted to admit. I hadn't missed it because it wasn't there. I'd missed it because looking at it would have cost me something I couldn't afford to spend while I was spending everything else. But I wasn't doing that anymore. The next morning, Raymond was gone before 6. I heard him, the careful sounds of a man trying not to wake someone, the slow draw of a dresser drawer, the soft click of the bathroom door, shoes carried to the hallway to be put on there. Considerate. Practiced. I lay still and listened to him leave his own house like a guest who'd overstayed. The front door closed at 5:53. I gave it 10 minutes. Then I got up, made coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with my phone. I've been paying our phone bill for 3 years. Raymond put it in my name when his credit took a hit after a car loan he mismanaged in 2021, and neither of us ever moved it back. I had full account access. Every line, every call log, every text thread timestamp. I'd never looked at his. Not once. Not because I was naive, because I was busy, and because I believed in him, and because those two things together made a very effective blind spot. I opened the Carrier app with my coffee still steaming. It took me less than 4 minutes to find it. There was a number Raymond had been in contact with. Calls and texts, back and forth, sometimes for stretches that ran over an hour, going back at least 9 months in the visible log history. Maybe longer, but 9 months was as far back as the app showed. Sometimes twice in a day. Sometimes a Saturday morning when I was at the grocery store picking up his supplements. Sometimes late, after 10, when I was already asleep from exhaustion. I wrote the number down on the notepad I keep by the fruit bowl, the one I use for grocery lists. I stared at it for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called my younger sister Kezia, a paralegal at a small family law firm across town. She picked up on the second ring. "You're calling me before 7. I need a legal question answered." A beat. I could hear her set something down. "Okay. Hypothetically," I said, "if a spouse reduces their career and income significantly to serve as a primary caregiver during the other spouse's serious illness, does that factor into a divorce settlement? The income sacrifice, the career interruption, does it count for anything?" Kezia didn't answer immediately. That's her tell when she's being precise rather than fast. "Yes," she said, "it absolutely can. Especially when you can document the income loss, establish the timeline, and show direct connection between the sacrifice and the other spouse's recovery. A judge pays attention to that, particularly if the filing spouse has clean hands on paper and the other one," she paused, "doesn't." "Good to know," I said. "Diane. I'll call you later this week." "Diane, thank you, Kez." I hung up. She knew I wasn't telling her everything. She'd wait. That's the thing about Kezia. She understood the difference between being kept out and being kept in reserve. I wasn't ready to say the whole thing out loud yet. I needed to know how much of it was real first. Raymond's home office was at the end of the hallway, second door on the left. I'd respected that space for 2 years. During his illness, it became a kind of sanctuary, the one room in the house that was just his, where he could close the door and be something other than a patient. I never went in uninvited. I slid his mail under the door. I knocked if I needed him. I gave him that, the way I gave him everything, without being asked. I opened the door and walked in. It smelled like him, cologne and paper and the faint cedar of the bookshelf he'd built himself the first year we moved in. I used to love that smell. I didn't let myself sit with it. I went to the filing cabinet first. 2 drawers, organized in that particular Raymond way that looked meticulous, but was mostly alphabetical by category he'd invented himself. I went through it folder by folder. Tax returns, insurance documents, his vehicle warranty, still filed, for a car he sold in 2020. The manila folder was in the bottom drawer, near the back, behind a hanging file labeled MISC Medical. No label on the folder itself, just a plain manila folder that someone had put in a place where it was unlikely to be the first thing found. I opened it. Printed emails. 24 pages, maybe more. The kind of careful printing that meant someone wanted a record they could hold, not just a file they could delete. The name in the header was Felice, Raymond's colleague. I placed her immediately, even after 2 years. I'd met her once, briefly, at his company holiday party. Polished, easy in a room. The kind of woman I'd glanced at and then deliberately looked away from, because the alternative would have cost me something I didn't have to spare. I turned to the earliest page. The date at the top stopped me. 14 months ago. 4 months into Raymond's chemotherapy. 4 months into the period when I was driving him to treatment twice a week, managing his medication schedule, sleeping in a recliner so he wouldn't wake up alone. I read the email. He called her his reason. He said she made him feel like himself again. And at the bottom, in a line that sat perfectly still on the page while everything else in me went loud, he wrote, "I'm working on an exit." I took out my phone. I photographed every single page. I sat at the kitchen table until the light outside went gray. The printed emails were still on my phone, every photograph lined up in my camera roll in the order I'd taken them. I opened my legal pad to a fresh page. I wrote the date at the top. Then I pulled up the reverse lookup app Kezia had texted me about 6 months ago when one of her clients needed it for a case. I downloaded it without thinking much about it, filed it away the way I file everything, just in case. I typed in the number from my notepad. It took about 40 seconds. The name that came back was Felice. I sat with that for a moment. Not because I was surprised. I wasn't, not really. But there's a difference between suspecting something and watching it confirmed on a screen in your own kitchen under the same overhead light you've cooked under for 11 years. My hands went still on the table. Then I picked up the pen and kept writing. I'm a nurse. I document. It's not something I think about. It's just how my brain is wired after years of charting patient notes, medication times, intake, and output. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. That's the first thing they teach you, and it becomes permanent. So I did what I always do when something needs to be understood. I built a timeline. I pulled up the email photographs and noted every date. Then I pulled up the folder on my phone where I'd stored Raymond's medical records, appointment summaries, lab results, the oncologist's initial consultation notes, because of course I had them. I'd been the one organizing his care from day one. I cross-referenced the dates. The earliest email between Raymond and Felice was dated 14 months ago. I'd already established that. But when I set it against Dr. Odom's initial consultation record, something shifted. Dr. Odom's first appointment with Raymond, the one where she ordered the initial biopsy, was 13 months ago. The first email predated the diagnosis by several weeks. You know what that means? It means the affair didn't start because Raymond nearly died and got scared and made a terrible decision in a moment of weakness. It means it was already running when the doctor called with the results. It was already there when he sat across from me and I held his hand while he cried. Whatever he was building with Felice, he'd been building it before he was a sick man. He just let the illness give it cover. I remembered the holiday party. 2 years ago, the December before all of it. Raymond's company did it up every year. Open bar, a DJ who played music 10 years too young for the room, everybody in something festive. I'd gone in a dark green dress I still have somewhere in the back of the closet. I'd met Felice for maybe 4 minutes near the shrimp cocktail. She was easy to talk to. That was what I remembered most, how easy she was in a conversation, how she laughed at something Raymond said and touched his arm just briefly, just once, and I'd felt a small, cold thing move through me that I immediately decided not to examine. I filed it away. I had nowhere to put it and too much else to carry. I put the pen down for a second. I still remember the smell of his cologne that night, warm and cedar clean. I'd bought it for him the Christmas before. He'd kissed me in the parking garage on the way out and said it had been a good night. I'd believed him completely. I picked the pen back up. I went to the filing cabinet in our shared office space, the one in the spare room, not his private office, and pulled the last 2 years of tax returns. Raymond had always handled filing. I reviewed the documents. I took my time. The life insurance policy update jumped out because it referenced a beneficiary change form filed 8 months ago. The original policy named me. The updated form listed his mother. I photographed it. 8 months ago, I was still crushing his medication into applesauce because the pills made him gag. I kept going. The bank statement I found tucked behind the tax folders was for an account I had never seen before. Raymond's name only. Opened 19 months ago, 2 months into his treatment, 2 months after the affair had already started. The balance was $14,000, built through transfers so small and spaced so evenly that they looked like nothing until you added them all together. Patient, deliberate, invisible if you weren't looking. I photographed every page. Then I called Kezia. This time I told her everything, all of it in order, from the phone log to the emails to the beneficiary change to the account. I didn't editorialize. I just laid the facts down the way I'd lay down a patient chart. Clean, sequential, complete. Kezia was quiet for almost 10 full seconds when I finished. Then she said, "Don't touch anything else tonight. I'm booking you with our lead attorney first thing Monday morning, 8:30. Can you be there?" "Yes," I said. "Good." Her voice was steady, but I knew my sister. Underneath it, she was already building something. "I'll send you the address." Monday morning. I wore the same scrubs I'd wear to a shift. Nothing that said I'd been up since 5 organizing folders. Nothing that said anything at all. Kezia met me in the parking lot of her firm at 8:15. She had 2 coffees and a look on her face I recognized from childhood. The one that meant she'd already thought 3 moves ahead and was waiting for me to catch up. She hugged me once, quick and firm, and then she walked me inside like she was guiding me through a hospital corridor. Purposeful, no wasted steps. The lead divorce attorney was a compact woman in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up into her natural hair and a desk that told you everything. Organized, but working. Stacked files, color-coded tabs, a legal pad already open. She shook my hand and looked at me the way professionals look at each other. Assessing, not unkind. She didn't open with sympathy. She opened with a question. "Before we look at anything you've brought, do you know whether your husband has already spoken to an attorney?" I told her I didn't know. She nodded slowly, like that was the answer she'd expected. If he's already retained counsel, she said, or if he's already filed, your leverage window changes. It doesn't close, but it changes. So the first thing we're going to do after this meeting is run a courthouse check. If nothing's been filed under his name, we move immediately and we move quietly. She said quietly the way I say carefully to a patient before a procedure that's going to hurt. I set my folder on her desk. She went through everything methodically. I'd printed the email photographs. I'd printed the phone records from the carrier app, highlighted the repeated number, noted the call durations. I had the bank statement for Raymond's private account, the life insurance beneficiary change document, and 2 years of my own pay stubs with the drop from full-time clearly visible. 40 hours a week down to 16, month by month, starting the week after Raymond's diagnosis was confirmed. She didn't rush. She read each document the way I read a medication label. Thoroughly. Twice. When she got to my pay stubs, she paused. Did you keep anything that documents the caregiving itself? Appointment records, mileage, out-of-pocket expenses? I reached into the folder and pulled out the second stack. Mileage logs going back 22 months. I'd kept them out of nursing habit, the same way I logged home visit mileage at work. Receipts for prescriptions, supplements, and 2 pieces of medical equipment the insurance had only partially covered. The enrollment pause letter from my BSN program showing exactly where I'd stopped and when. She set her pen down. Mrs. Diane, she said, what you have here is not just a divorce case. What you have is a reimbursement argument, and a strong one. In this state, documented financial sacrifice made in direct service of a spouse's recovery carries real weight, especially when you can show the timeline the way you've shown it here. She tapped the pay stubs. $58,000 in forfeited income, conservatively, when I calculated at current LVN rates. Add the out-of-pocket medical costs and the deferred educational investment, and you have a number a judge is going to take seriously. My throat tightened, just for a second. Not from sadness, from something closer to recognition, like hearing someone name a thing you'd been carrying without a word for it. I thought about the Tuesday mornings I'd rearranged my entire work schedule around his infusion appointments, the stack of overtime shifts I'd declined because I needed to be home. I'd never once called it a sacrifice. I'd just called it love. She picked the pen back up. Here's what I need you to do. Keep gathering, quietly. Don't change anything about your routine at home. Don't move money, don't remove documents from the house, and do not, under any circumstances, let him see that anything has shifted for you. She looked at me directly over her glasses. Can you do that? Yes, I said, and I meant it the way I mean most things, completely and without drama. Let me tell you something about driving home from that meeting. It was 40 minutes on surface streets, no radio, nothing but my own thinking. And I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel powerful. I just felt clear, like the fog that had been sitting over everything for the past 72 hours had finally burned off, and I could see the ground under my feet. I pulled into the driveway at 6:10. I walked inside. I set my bag down. I pulled chicken from the refrigerator and started dinner. Raymond came home 40 minutes later. He washed his hands, sat at the table, looked around at the warm kitchen and the food I'd put together, and he settled into it the way a man settles into something familiar. He said, "Smells good." I said, "It'll be ready in 10 minutes. He nodded, relaxed his shoulders. He read my composure as acceptance, as a woman coming to terms with what was happening, finding her footing, moving toward resignation. He was wrong. The following Sunday morning, I didn't sit with Raymond in the pew. I left the house 40 minutes before him, told him I wanted to help with the flowers. He didn't question it. He barely looked up from his phone. Pastor Yvonne's church had a small office just off the vestibule, a room that smelled like old wood and printed bulletins and something faintly floral I'd never been able to name. I knocked on the half-open door at 8:20. She was already there, already reading, glasses low on her nose. She looked up and I watched her take in my face the way a woman with decades of ministry takes in a face, reading past the surface without commenting on what she sees. "Close the door," she said. "Sit down." I did both. You know what I noticed in that room? The quiet. Not silence. There was noise filtering in from the parking lot, cars and voices and the distant shuffle of the choir warming up. But inside that office, there was a quality of stillness that felt deliberate, like she'd cultivated it on purpose. Like she'd been making space for hard things to be said for so long that the room itself had learned how. I folded my hands in my lap, and I told her everything. The smoothie, the remission appointment, the kitchen table, the phone face down on the nightstand for months, the thing I'd been seeing without looking at. I told her about the carrier app and the number, the emails in the manila folder, the name Felice, the holiday party 2 years ago when I'd felt something flicker at the back of my mind and pressed it down because I couldn't afford to carry one more thing. I told her about the private savings account, 19 months of careful, quiet transfers. I told her about the life insurance beneficiary change. I told her about the attorney's office and the number she'd calculated, $58,000, said out loud in a professional voice, and how that number had felt like being handed back something I hadn't known was gone. My throat never closed. My voice never broke. I just talked, the way I talk through a difficult case assessment, with precision, in order, without editorializing. Pastor Yvonne didn't move, didn't nod excessively or murmur sympathetically or reach for my hand. She sat in her chair with her reading glasses still on, and she listened to every word, like each one mattered, and she was determined not to miss it. When I finished, the room was quiet again. She took one breath, slow, settled. Then she said, "Baby, a man who plans his exit while his wife is keeping him alive has already told you everything you need to know about who he is." That was it. That was all. My hands went still in my lap. It wasn't a revelation, exactly. I already knew what Raymond was. I'd known it since I'd seen that first email, maybe longer. But there's a difference between knowing something inside yourself and hearing another person, someone who has seen more of life than you have, who has no stake in your decisions. Name it plainly, without flinching, without dressing it in comfort it doesn't deserve. She gave it to me plain, and plain was what I needed. After the service, I drove home ahead of Raymond, changed out of my church clothes, and spread everything across the kitchen table. I'd been gathering in pieces, photographing here, printing there, keeping things in different places the way you do when you're still not sure what shape the thing you're building is going to take. That afternoon, I made it official. I put it all together. The mileage logs went in first. 22 months of them, every appointment, every infusion, every follow-up scan. 4,217 miles, by my calculation, driven in service of one man's survival. I'd kept those logs the same way I kept my nursing home visit logs, automatically, without thinking, because documentation was just part of how my brain worked. I'd never once imagined they'd matter for this. Then the prescription receipts, sorted by date. The 2 equipment receipts insurance had only partially covered. The enrollment pause letter from my BSN program, with the timestamp that placed it exactly 6 days after Raymond's diagnosis was confirmed. Then my pay stubs, 2 full years, full-time down to near nothing, month by month, a paper record of every shift I'd traded away. I thought about the drive back from his first chemo session, how I'd pulled over in a CVS parking lot because he was nauseated and we weren't close enough to home. I remembered the way the fluorescent light of the sign fell orange across the dashboard while I rubbed circles on his back. I thought I was fighting for something permanent. I clipped everything together, labeled the folder in my neatest handwriting, the same print I use for patient charts, put it in my work bag, which went in the back seat of my car. Then I made dinner, washed the dishes, and went to bed. I didn't sleep right away, but I wasn't restless either. It was something quieter than that, the particular stillness of a woman who has made her decision, folded it up, and placed it somewhere safe inside herself. After the attorney meeting, my lunch break at the clinic ran from noon to 12:30 on a good day. I was eating a container of leftover rice at the nurse's station when Kezia called. I stepped into the hallway. "Talk to me," I said. She didn't ease into it. That's not how Kezia operates. She said, "He applied for a transfer, another city. The position was posted 6 weeks ago. He put his application in 3 weeks ago." I leaned against the wall, said nothing. "Diane," her voice was careful in a way it almost never is, "if he relocates before you file, you're managing this without him in the same metro area. Court appearances, negotiations, all of it. That's what he was counting on." You know what hits hardest? Not the betrayal itself, by the time you've lived with it long enough. It's the architecture of it, the sequence. The fact that someone sat across from you at a dinner table, watched you cut his pills in half so they'd be easier to swallow, and was simultaneously drawing a map out of your life. I asked her how far back the planning went. She told me. 7 months ago, Raymond had consulted a divorce attorney for the first time. 7 months. Which meant, and I did the math standing in that hallway with the sounds of the clinic going on around me, he had walked into a lawyer's office within weeks of his oncologist projecting a probable remission timeline. The moment survival started looking likely, the moment the finish line came into view. He didn't wait until he was well. He didn't wait until he was grateful. He started planning his exit the same season I was learning which anti-nausea medications worked and which ones made things worse. My throat tightened, just for a second. I smoothed my scrub top with my free hand and I stood up straight. "Call your attorney," Kezia said. "Today. Don't wait for 5 o'clock." I called from the parking lot with 6 minutes left on my break. My attorney picked up on the second ring, and when I laid out what Kezia had found, she didn't pause for even a breath before she said, "We file today, this afternoon. I'll have everything ready by 3. I said, "Do it." She asked if I was sure, not in a hesitant way, in the way professionals ask when they want confirmation on record. "File," I said. I went back inside and finished the rest of my rice. I charted 2 patient assessments. I administered a 2 o'clock medication round with the same hands I used to sign the authorization. Those hands didn't shake. I didn't need them to. The following Wednesday, I was home when it happened, mid-morning, a day off. I was at the kitchen sink, glass in hand, watching the water run. Raymond was at his office. The process server was a professional. Kezia had confirmed the timing. The papers would be delivered between 10 and 11. I hadn't told Raymond anything. I hadn't changed my tone, my routine, my expression across the dinner table. I had given him nothing to prepare with. What he'd planned as a clean, controlled exit on his own timeline, filed by him, framed by him, managed around his schedule and his transfer application and his new city and his new life, had just become something else entirely. My phone buzzed on the counter. 1 word from Kezia. Done. I read it once, set the phone face down on the counter, screen against the tile, and I finished washing the dishes. The call came 47 minutes after the papers were served. I was still at the house, sitting on the couch with a glass of water and a patient assessment form I was supposed to review before my next shift. Raymond's name lit up my phone screen. I watched it go dark, watched it light up again 5 seconds later. I let it go to voicemail both times. I gave it 20 minutes. Then I played the message. His voice was different, not broken. Raymond doesn't break, not in ways he can't manage, but the careful, rehearsed quality was gone. The composure he'd been wearing since the night he sat across from me with his hands flat on the table had slipped, and what was underneath it was something closer to confusion. Like a man who'd drawn a map and walked out to find the roads rearranged. He said, "Diane, I don't know what you think this accomplishes. Look, I know this is hard, and I know you're hurting, but getting attorneys involved is only going to make this ugly for both of us. I thought you understood where things were heading. I thought we were on the same page about keeping this civil. Call me back. We should talk. We can figure this out without all of this." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of Felice, of the savings account, of the 7 months of quiet planning. Just the assumption, still, even now, that the problem was my response rather than his actions. I listened to it once. I deleted it. That evening, he came home at 6:15. I heard his key in the lock. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the same chair I'd been sitting in the night he asked for the divorce, and I did not get up. He sat across from me, same table, same positions, like we were replaying something. "I think we should talk," he said. His voice was measured again. He'd had hours to reconstruct the tone. "Like adults, without attorneys turning this into a war." I let the silence sit for a moment. He pressed forward into it. "I thought you understood where things were heading, Diane. We'd already talked about this. I was trying to handle this with some dignity. And then today—" He shook his head, like what I'd done was a disappointment he hadn't anticipated. "I don't even recognize this. This isn't you." You know what's interesting about a man who underestimates you? He doesn't know he's doing it. He genuinely believes the version of you he constructed in his head, and when you deviate from it, he calls it out of character. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "I understood everything." He blinked. That landed somewhere. "What does that mean?" He leaned forward. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish here? You lawyer up, you go on the offensive. What do you think you're going to get out of this? Because if you think you're going to walk away with more than what's fair, that's not how this works. We built this together, equally, and I've been more than reasonable in how I've approached—" I picked up my bag. I picked up my keys. I picked up my coffee. He was still talking. I looked back at him once, just once, from the edge of the kitchen, and I said, "More than you plan to give me." Then I walked out. I drove to Kezia's apartment on the east side, windows down, the evening air doing what it could. She'd already made up the guest room. She handed me a plate of food without asking if I was hungry, and we sat at her table, and she didn't make me talk about it. That's the thing about Kezia. She knows when words help and when they're just noise. I ate. I took a shower. I sat on the edge of the guest bed in the quiet of her apartment, and I felt the weight of the day settle into my shoulders all at once. Not grief, not rage. Something more like the exhaustion that comes after a long shift, the kind where you held everything together for 8 hours and your body doesn't know how to stop until the door closes behind you. I thought about those drives to the oncology clinic, the way the morning light used to come through the passenger window and land on Raymond's face, and I used to think, quietly, that I would do anything to keep him here. I had meant it, every mile of it. I picked up my phone. Dr. Nkechi Odom's office, the oncology practice that had managed Raymond's case from diagnosis to remission, had an after-hours voicemail line. I dialed it. I kept my voice even and clear, because clarity is a habit I don't turn off. I said I was Raymond's wife and primary caregiver throughout his treatment. I said I was hoping to arrange a brief professional conversation about my documented role in his care. I left my number. I already knew what I needed her to say. She'd already said it, once, without knowing it mattered. Now I just needed it in writing. 6 weeks later. The conference room was beige and quiet and smelled like recycled air. There was a water pitcher in the center of the table. Nobody touched it. Raymond sat across from me with his attorney, a man in a gray suit who'd introduced himself with a firm handshake and a name I immediately forgot, because he was never going to be the most important person in that room. Raymond was in his navy blazer, the one he wore to things he wanted to look serious for. I noticed. I filed it away the way I file everything, out of habit, out of the professional reflex that never fully sleeps. My attorney sat to my left. She set her leather folder on the table and folded her hands over it and waited. Kezia was in the lobby. She'd driven me here, and she'd drive me home. When I'd come out of the elevator and she'd seen my face, she'd just nodded once. That was enough. Raymond's attorney cleared his throat and opened with a number. It was low. It was insultingly, deliberately low, the kind of number designed to plant itself in the room as a reasonable starting point, and then slowly become the ceiling through the pressure of negotiation. A classic opening. I'd been warned about it. My attorney didn't blink. She didn't shift in her seat. She simply reached into her folder and placed the first document on the table, sliding it across the center with 2 fingers, like she was laying down a card she'd been holding all morning. Pay stubs. 2 years of them. Every pay period showing the reduction from full-time LVN hours down to 2 shifts a week. Then the ones showing the restoration after Raymond's remission. Each page annotated in the margin with a running total that appeared in bold at the bottom of the last sheet. $58,000. That's what I had not earned while I was keeping him alive. Raymond's attorney said, carefully, that personal income decisions during a marriage weren't necessarily a recoverable loss. My attorney said, "They are when they're documented this precisely." She reached into the folder again. The second document landed on the table with the same quiet efficiency. Bank records. Raymond's private savings account. The one opened 19 months ago. The one I wasn't supposed to know existed. Every transfer highlighted. The opening date circled in ink, because the opening date mattered. It predated his confirmed diagnosis by 3 weeks. He hadn't opened that account out of fear about his mortality or financial uncertainty about medical bills. He'd opened it because he was already building something without me in it. Raymond's jaw tightened. I saw it. I looked back at the window. The third document came out. 4 paragraphs. Clinical language. Dr. Nkechi Odom's letterhead at the top, her signature at the bottom. She'd been precise and generous and entirely factual. She'd confirmed, in the language of someone with decades of oncological authority, that the consistency of Raymond's in-home medication management, transportation, nutritional support, and monitored recovery environment had directly contributed to outcomes that would have been statistically less favorable without that level of caregiver involvement. She used the phrase, "beyond what is typical even in professional medical settings." The room went very still. Raymond's attorney asked for a recess. They stepped out. My attorney went to make a phone call. I stayed in my chair. Raymond didn't leave right away. He sat for a moment. Then he leaned toward me, not close, not threatening, just leaning, and his voice dropped to something almost private. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, quiet, not accusatory, almost like he meant it. I turned and looked at him, fully. For the first time all morning. "You didn't have to do any of what you did," I said. And yet, I turned back to the window. He left. When the session resumed, Raymond's attorney's tone had changed. The low number was gone, not renegotiated, abandoned. What came back to the table was something different, something that acknowledged the weight of what had been placed in front of them. My attorney and I had not come to fight. We had come to finish. The house was mine. The equity was mine. The lump sum settlement included a draw from Raymond's private account, the one he'd been building in secret while I drove him to his appointments, while I tracked his dosages, while I stayed. His transfer request, the one he'd filed 3 weeks before I filed first, became irrelevant. His financial obligations kept him in the metro area for 3 years minimum. He was not going anywhere. I signed the final documents without ceremony. No pause, no last look at Raymond across the table. I signed with the same pen I brought from home, a plain black pen from my nursing bag, and I capped it when I was done and put it back in my pocket. Then I stood up, picked up my bag, and walked out into the afternoon light. 8 months later, the study room at the nursing college closed at 9, but we always ran until 5 past because nobody wanted to be the one to call it. There were 6 of us at the table that Thursday evening, 5 women in their late 20s with highlighted textbooks and color-coded notes, and me. I was the one they turned to when the pharmacology unit stopped making sense, when the care plan format confused them, when the professor's wording on a practice exam felt like a trap. I answered their questions the way I answered everything, plainly, without performance, and only once. You know what's funny about being underestimated your whole life? You stop noticing when it reverses. One of the younger women, a sharp girl who always sat to my left, had asked me in the second week of class how old I was when I first started my clinical hours. I told her 38. She'd looked at me like that was either brave or tragic. By week 6, she was texting me the night before every exam. I didn't mind. That's what you do when someone needs the information and you have it. I packed up my bag at 9:07, drove home in the dark with the radio off, and unlocked the front door of my house. My house. That still landed differently every time I thought it. Not with giddiness, not with grief, just with the quiet, solid weight of a fact that belonged to me entirely. I'd repainted the kitchen the month after the divorce finalized. A warm ivory, nothing dramatic. I'd torn out the tile backsplash Raymond had complained about for 3 years, but never once moved to replace. He'd hated the pattern. I hadn't minded it. Now the wall behind the stove was clean and bare, waiting for whatever I chose to put there. And I hadn't chosen yet, and that was fine. There was no timeline. I remembered the day we'd first seen this kitchen, Raymond announcing that the layout was inefficient, me saying we could make it work, both of us believing we were talking about the same future. We weren't, probably, but I didn't spend much time on that anymore. Sunday mornings, I made 1 cup of coffee, ground the beans, ran the machine, poured it into the mug I'd bought myself after I signed the final papers. I used to make 2 cups automatically. The second one started before I was even fully awake. Now I made 1, and I sat with it at the kitchen table, and the quiet wasn't the sharp kind, the kind with an absence carved into it. It was the other kind, the kind you choose, the kind that belongs to you. Kezia and I had dinner every Thursday. We'd started it the week after mediation and kept it without discussion, the way you keep the things that work. Pastor Yvonne joined us once a month, usually the 3rd Thursday, and those dinners ran the latest. She brought her opinions about everything and delivered them without apology, and we disagreed with her on roughly 40% of it. And that was exactly right. These were not sad meals. They were loud, and the food was good, and nobody talked about Raymond unless there was something new worth saying. There wasn't, usually. Though once, about 3 months back, a colleague from my old hospital unit had mentioned Felice, not knowing the full story, just passing along what circulated through the professional network the way those things do. Felice had been passed over for a promotion she'd spent 2 years carefully positioning herself for. An internal HR complaint had surfaced, something about an undisclosed relationship with a direct superior, a policy violation that didn't look good when it came attached to a promotion recommendation. She'd left the company before the year ended. The relationship, my colleague mentioned with a small shrug, apparently hadn't survived the fallout. My hands were still when I heard it. Not satisfied exactly, not anything I had a clean word for. I hadn't aimed at Felice, I want to be clear about that. My strategy never had her name on it. What happened to her was the natural consequence of choices she made, the same way what happened to Raymond was the natural consequence of his. I just built the documentation. Consequences built themselves. Raymond was renting an apartment across town. I knew because Kezia knew, and Kezia knew because she made it her business to know. 3rd floor, a view of a parking garage. I wasn't glad about that specifically. I didn't feel anything about the parking garage. I felt finished. That's the word. Not triumphant. Triumphant implies a contest, and a contest implies 2 people trying for the same thing, and we were never trying for the same thing. He was trying to escape. I was trying to stay whole. I won, but that's not the part that mattered most. I set my bag down by the door, went to the kitchen, and finished the last of the coffee I'd left in the press before class, still warm. I closed my textbook and stacked it on top of my notes. I turned off the kitchen light. The house went quiet around me. Not the sharp kind, the other kind. Mine. I kept him alive, then I kept myself alive. And if you ask me which one was harder, I'll tell you it was never a contest. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!